Hello and welcome to Speaking Spirit, where we talk about all things spiritual. Your host, John Moore, is a shamanic practitioner and spiritual teacher. And now, here's John.
Hello, everybody. Hello, my friends, all over the world, wherever you are, whenever you are listening to this. Today, I am going to talk, I'm going to take a practical, I'm going to do a very, hopefully, practical, meaning you can take what I talk about today and put it into practice in a way that is beneficial to you. So, I'm going to take a practical approach today. Today, I'm going to talk about altars, personal altars. I'm going to talk about why you might have a personal altar, what to do at a personal altar, how to set up a personal altar, what not to do maybe, set up a personal altar, excuse me, and what are the benefits of having personal altars. And you may have more than one, and what are the different kinds of altars, and all kinds of stuff. I'm going to talk about altars today. It's a topic that I love, as is everything I talk about. Because I get to pick the topics. It's my podcast. Isn't that cool? I'm also happy to talk about things that other people are interested in hearing about. And if you contact me through my website or social media or however, certainly I would be happy to entertain topics. I probably would not talk about something that I had no clue about, because that would be a very short podcast, and I don't like I try not to just make stuff up. Do my best. Don't think I ever have on one of these podcasts. Things are certainly my opinion and whatnot. So today we're going to talk about an altar, and we all know what an altar is. We've all seen altars. Maybe you've been in church or temple, or you might live in a culture where you have some sort of spiritual altar in your home. And if you're not religious, surely you've seen TV programs or whatever movies where altars have been represented. So, what is an altar? Is it just a table, where religious things happen? Well, in a way, yes and no. So, one thing that I know and notice is that altars exist in all kinds of spiritual traditions, right? And I don't just mean organized religions where you go to a church or a temple or a mosque or synagogue or whatever, and there's an altar up front where religious ceremony is held, but there are lots of traditions going back to the beginning of humanity where altars were a place of spiritual focus. I know that in Andean cultures, Andean shamanic cultures, they would lay out a cloth on the ground that would become an altar. I know in Shinto traditions, in Japan, many, maybe even most families have a kamidana, or a shelf in their home for the spirits as a type of altar. In my opinion, we could perhaps differ on whether or not that constituted an altar, but I believe it serves the purpose of being an altar. In ancient Norse cultures, there were religious temples where people would do pilgrimages to and gather and feast and do sacrifices and that sort of thing. But they also had outdoor altars that they would that they would set up and worship. And I believe they would have indoor altars where they would have images of the gods that they worshiped, that sort of thing. So, and might I add, there is some evidence from prehistoric peoples of, skulls of cave bears and things being arranged in ways that would indicate, them being used in religious rites in a way that is similar to an altar. And so, altars are things that are cross-cultural and throughout time. And, you may have a personal altar, or you may not, or you may be wondering about why I should have an altar. So for me, an altar is I always, and I say this almost every time, I always define my terms just so that you can understand what I'm meaning to say. It is not to say that my definition is the definition, or if you looked it up in the dictionary might differ, or if you asked a religious scholar from Oxford what his or her definition was, the definition might differ, and that's fine. I'm not trying to present myself as the authority on definitions of things. I just want you to understand what I mean when I'm talking about this. So to me, an altar is a special surface. Excuse me. I do not edit these, and so if I have a little coffee go down the wrong pipe just a moment ago, I may cough a little bit, and I'm going to leave that in because I am imperfect, and my podcast will be imperfect, and I don't really edit them. So coughs and sneezes, and I don't think I've ever burped or farted, but if I did, who knows? I might probably leave that in too. So anyway, an altar is a special surface where that is a focus of spiritual activity. Okay, so if you think about, in a Christian church, an altar is, probably some sort of special table at the front of the church, maybe up on risers up above, and it is a place where communion might be prepared, or special candles and flowers are placed, and it's a place where ritual might take place. So it is a surface, a special surface where a prepared surface that is a place of spiritual focus. And a lot of people might have little altars that they meditate in front of, right? Might be a little table where they place, I don't know, an image of Buddha or some other spiritual figure, or light a candle, or put some incense, or that sort of thing, right? So again, it's a specially prepared surface that is a focus, a spiritual focus, or a focus of spiritual practice, or a focus of worship. And why do these show up everywhere? Why do we see these in so many traditions, in so many cultures across generations and generations of human beings? And who knows, maybe someday they'll discover that, other hominid species had altars. I don't know. I don't know enough about paleoanthropology to speak intelligently about that. So I won't. But, what I will say is that this seems to be an important or impactful practice. Having an altar seems to create an impact, a spiritual, psychological impact. Having a special place to help spiritual focus a specially prepared surface to have spiritual focus seems to have an impact on people enough that it has become an important, if not absolutely critical part of many, many spiritual practices. Now, if you were to walk around my house, and even outside my house, you would see many altars. You would see numerous surfaces that I have prepared for spiritual use, or for spiritual focus. And, the reason I have different altars, or, a number of different altars, is that for me, they provide different, they serve different purposes. They serve different focuses. So, for example, I have an outdoor altar that serves as a way for me to focus on and present offerings, and I'll talk about offerings today as well. Present offerings to the nature spirits that are, local. Local spirits are important, at least to me and to many other people, but definitely to me. And so I place offerings there, and I have a special place for them, for, where I can focus on them and interact and have a good relationship. So this altar allows me to be in relationship with these spirits. And that's another important use, right? It's to be in relationship with spirit. If you have, if you were of the, if you practice Shintoism, you would have a kamedana, which would be, house spirits in your home, and it would allow you to make offerings and, have a relationship with those spirits, and in hopes of, providing safety and providing harmony and watching out for you. And this, we see this tradition, similar tradition. You would have different words for it. The altar might look different, but it, very similar traditions throughout the world. So I have altars that allow me to sort of keep permanently, that allow me to have an ongoing relationship. And I, in my spiritual practice is shamanism, and shamanism is all about being in relationship to spirit and to spirits, to the different spirits that we interact with. So it is about creating, good relationships with spirits and maintaining them. And this particular altar does that. The center of my house, I have some shelves that actually have a couple of different, altars on them. And, one is akin to material things. It has some representations of deities that are provide materially, and not to sound like, money grubbing or greedy or anything like that. But this is the center of my home, and I am a provider for my family. And these are, this is an important consideration. If I were living in, a hunter-gatherer society, I would have a similar altar that perhaps had images of animals that I needed to hunt to sustain my family or sustain my tribe. So this is a similar thing. This is not about hoarding cash or buying a private plane. I have no aspirations to buy a private plane, anything like that. It is just about allowing me to provide safety and food and a home and clothing and the material necessities for my family and myself live, to be comfortable, to be safe, and to not be threatened, and that sort of thing. And it has served me very well. I'll probably do a podcast on money and the spiritual aspects of money at some point in the future. I think there are, a whole lot of misconceptions about that, but that is a little bit beyond the scope of this particular episode. I could go down that pathway at least for an entire episode. So maybe the next one I'll do about money and the spiritual aspects of money, and that sort of thing. So I have that, and then there is an altar that is sort of dedicated to divinatory practice, meaning I have my decks of tarot cards there, and I have several pendulums there, and I have images of some of the spirits that I work with, sculptures and that sort of thing there. And then I have another altar elsewhere in my house that has representations of all the power animals that I work with. Again, this is about me being in relationship with them. I have a lot of altars. I have another altar that has representations of the traditional elements of earth, wind, water, and fire, or earth, air, water, and fire, however you want to put it. Allows me to be in relationship to those elements. And, amongst others, I have a few others. I'm not going to go through all of them. I don't want to bore you. And I guess I'm kind of an altar fanatic. But I have an altar where I do very specific ceremonies, very specific rituals. And I did a podcast on ritual and ceremony before. Ritual is symbolic action, right? Ritual is something that we do that is symbolic. So, when I train martial arts my whole life. When I enter a dojo space, I bow. That is a symbolic action of respect. It is a ritual that I am doing. Or a ritual might be, I do a certain chant and perform a certain set of exercises. And a ceremony is something that's done to mark that a special occasion that includes ritual. So a ceremony might be like a wedding ceremony, right? A wedding ceremony might include lots of rituals or a ritual, but it marks a special occasion in time, which is the creation of a marriage. And other spiritual things are ceremonial, right? They mark out something special. And we have ceremonies. Birthday celebrations include ceremonies. At least in the U.S., we have our tradition I'm comfortable with. I grew up in. We have a birthday cake, and we put candles on it. Normally, one candle for every year the person was born. I guess up until they become a certain age, and then it becomes a fire hazard. We sing to the person, and then they make a wish and blow the candles out. That is a ceremony, marks a special occasion, and it includes ritual action, like the blowing out, the candles representing each year of birth, the blowing out of the candles. And we may not think of that as a spiritual or religious ceremony because it's very lighthearted. But in essence, it is, because it's still symbolic action. It's still metaphorical. It's still, is meant to convey something through symbolism. And the ceremony aspect is that it marks out, a passing of a year in somebody's life. So anyway, that's ritual and ceremony. And so I have an altar where I do certain ceremonies. I make offerings, and I told you I would talk about offerings. So why might you want to create a personal altar if you don't have one already? There are lots of reasons. There are probably as many reasons as there are people, if not more. I have more than one altar that I use for different reasons. But again, it's a specially prepared surface that allows for certain spiritual focus to take place. So if you meditate or you want to meditate, you might create a small altar where you can, that helps you focus your attention when you meditate, or something that is inspiring. Because an altar has the ability to impact us on a spiritual level and a psychological level, right? Is a physical representation that allows us to focus, to create atmosphere, to have a psychological impact. The things you place on an altar are important. The things you choose not to place on an altar are important. The size and shape of an altar aren't all that important. So in my when I teach shamanism in classes, I talk to people about creating their own altar. It is a fairly important practice in shamanism. And I have people from all walks of life who have different living arrangements, and they might live in a tiny apartment, or they might live in a huge house, or who knows, right? And so space is sometimes a consideration. So a shelf can be an altar, or a windowsill can be an altar. You can also have, and this is common in many traditions as well, you can also have a temporary altar. When I teach in a space where there is no altar surface, I will set up a temporary altar. I will put out a special cloth on the ground. I will set candles. It uses a square altar cloth, and I will place candles on each of the corners, and I will put a bowl of flowers in the middle, and people will place sacred objects on and around the altar. And this becomes the altar for the time that I'm teaching the class, maybe a 2-day class or what have you. It does not have to be a permanent fixture. Now, there are advantages to having permanent altars, right? Like the more focus you put on something, the more sort of energy it gathers, right? So there is this effect. I don't have a good term for it yet. I got to think of one, but if you've ever done this experiment as a kid, maybe you did it in school, where you took a piece of metal, maybe it was a nail or a screw or something, right? And you took a permanent magnet, and you rubbed the magnet, or you rubbed the nail over the magnet, or you rubbed the magnet over the nail in the same direction over and over and over and over again. And the nail became magnetized, right? The magnet changed the configuration of the ions in the nail, and it became magnetic. And then you could, maybe not as strong as the permanent magnet, but you can magnetize things that way. Or you can magnetize metal by passing them through, magnetic fields. Well, that is passing it through a magnetic field, but generated by electricity. So the same thing happens happens on a spiritual level, that when we work with something spiritually, its spiritual essence gets rearranged over time, and the more you work with something, the more sort of power it gets imbued with, or the more in alignment with its spiritual purpose. And I'll give you an example of that. I may give you a couple examples. So there are lots of traditions that use prayer beads, right? I know they're used for example, in Catholicism to count prayers. They're used in Hindu traditions and Buddhist traditions to count repetitions of chants. There are probably other traditions that have something similar where you're counting the number of chants. And so, if you have a set of prayer beads, so, in Hindu and Buddhist tradition, I think they're always called mala beads, but I'll say they're called mala beads for my purposes. I could be, if I'm misspeaking or mispronouncing, forgive me. Feel free to send me a message and correct me. I mean no disrespect. I'm just, using the terms I know. So you have these mala beads, and you chant, and you count the number of times you chant. And so in Hinduism and Buddhism, traditionally, there would be 108 of those. It's a sacred number. And so you would count, 108 mantra chants, mantra repetitions with that set of mala beads. Now, I have been taught, and people may have been taught something different, that if I recite different mantras, right? So I have, one mantra, we'll say Om Mani Padme Hum. Let's say that I chant that mantra, and then I have another mantra that I chant Om Namah Shivaya or something, that I should use different set of mala beads for each mantra. And the reason for that is that as I'm using that over and over again, it becomes imbued with the power and intention of that particular mantra. And if I chant a different mantra over the same beads, it's sort of like erasing the work that I did before, or confusing, or that sort of thing, right? So this object, this string of beads, is no longer just a string and beads. It becomes a sacred, spiritually charged object that helps me as I continue to do this practice. So in shamanism, we work with different tools. I might work with a drum. I might work with rattles, right? And, we might do ceremony to empower these tools to be sacred objects. And that's an important part of the practice. However, we also continually work with them, right? So the more I work with clients and, I'm drumming, or I'm teaching a class and I'm drumming, again, I'm using this for the same purpose, and it gets imbued with the energy that is around it. Just like rubbing a magnet over a nail, you have to do it in the same direction. If you rub it in a different direction, it's going to demagnetize the nail. So the same thing happens. So this is the thing with altars as well. If you have an altar, and this is not to say that you have to be altar crazy like I am and have a ton of different single purpose altars. You certainly can have an altar, or an altar piece, or an altar space that serves multiple purposes. They should be sort of aligned. As the more you can make them aligned, the better. So, if I have an altar where I meditate and I have, certain deities on there, I should make sure that they're compatible. This is not to say you can't have syncretistic altars where you have deities from multiple pantheons, but make sure they're compatible. Sometimes that's not really okay. And I've heard stories of people not really knowing what they were doing, perhaps creating an altar where they put representations of certain African deities on, and there were two deities on there that traditionally were enemies. And this caused a significant amount of strife until it was remedied by somebody who knew what they were doing. So just be careful, it does sort of serve us well to know what we're doing. There is, I'm not really a love and light spiritual person. I believe in love and light. I love everyone. I believe in the power of light, but I also believe that the brighter the light, the darker the shadow, and that there are, the idea that all deity or all spirit or all whatever is altruistic and beneficent doesn't always pan out really well, and sort of ignores things that are true in other cultures. It's sort of, in my opinion, it's a little bit of spiritual optimism, but it's sort of cockeyed optimism in that it's overlooking some things, that there are wrathful deities. There are stories of deities being at war. So for example, if I were following the ancient Norse pantheon, I probably would not put a representation of Odin and a representation of a storm giant on the same altar, unless I really wanted to cause some strife. So here's the thing, okay? Whether or not you believe that gods and goddesses are real, or that these deities are figments of people's imagination, it doesn't really matter all that much, because what matters is that these at least psychologically, but I would argue very much so spiritually, and I have had lots and lots of experiences with different deities, that these are real intelligences. However, if you don't want to believe that, you could believe that they represent different forces in the collective unconscious, or real archetypes. And those archetypes could potentially be at conflict with one another. Okay? So you might not want Odin and a frost giant. So if I were to just say that these representations are mythological, archetypal constructs that don't really exist on a spiritual plane, which is not my truth, by the way, but maybe your truth, and so I want to respect that. We could say that these are archetypal forces that represent, for thousands of, at least several thousand years, that represent absolute destructive conflict and the forces of order and chaos being at battle with each other. And unless you really want that psychological representation in your home, seems like a bad idea to me. You can do whatever you want. I'm just telling you my take and telling you what might happen. I don't know of anybody that keeps altars to frost giants. I'm just using this as an example. But there are certain pantheons where the gods and goddesses don't necessarily get along. I know that they're certainly in some I've definitely heard stories in some African traditions, and I don't know enough about it to speak about the specific pantheon or the specific gods and goddesses. But I'm just relating something from somebody who has some experience with African magic and African spiritual work, and relating a story to me. And then I don't, so again, the other thing is that altars can quickly become, you can, have sort of the kitchen sink altar, and I've at times been guilty of this, where you put everything on an altar. I've seen altars that are just covered with stones and oracle cards and images of angels and images of Native Americans and images of animals and images of this and images of that. And in that case, you potentially run the risk of creating an unfocused altar. And again, an altar is to me, is a specially prepared surface that helps create spiritual focus. And so if you have a junky altar that looks like your local New Age candle store with stuff strewn all over the place, that might not provide the greatest effect. It might not provide the focus, the spiritual focus that would be most beneficial to you. So it's just something to consider. Have a look at it. I actually had this great exercise, and you can perform this yourself, and you can perform it in your home. You can perform it with your altar. You can perform it with your workspace. And this comes from a neurological-based coaching practice where you would do an inventory, where you would look around the room with if you were a coach, you would take your client and you would look around the room and look at every object in the room one by one, and just talk about what is your first visceral emotional reaction to that object and how strong that was. Is it positive? Is it negative? Does it make you feel good? Does it make you feel bad? So you can do that with your altar. You can do that with each item on your altar, and then you can do it with your altar as a whole. You can do it with different arrangements of your altar. Okay? And emotions are closely tied to spirit. They are, when we perceive emotions, they can sometimes be an indication that there is a spiritual disturbance, or our spirit is doing really well. I can tell you that soul loss, which is a breaking away of pieces of the soul body, usually due to trauma, can come with severe depression, severe anxiety, dissociation, that sort of thing. So those are sort of like the spirit body, the soul body, bubbling those things forward into consciousness through emotions and through sort of cognitive experience, how we're perceiving the world. So perceptual experience, emotional experience, all of those things. So those things are very closely linked. So you can have a look at your altar space. So again, if you listen to this podcast and you go, oh wow, I'd like an altar space for X, Y, or Z purpose. You can create one anywhere, almost anywhere you are. It does not have to be permanent. A permanent one is has some advantages, and I talked about that, how the spiritual energy sort of rubs off. It creates a vibratory field, if you will, or a field of spiritual energy. If you worship at the same altar day in and day out, it becomes easier to worship there because there's sort of this, you wind up in the aura of this object, and objects do have aura. If you know of like psychics who do psychometry or find lost people or things or animals or what have you, frequently they'll hold an object that belonged to the person or the person wore. And this is the same thing. The signature, the energy signature, is rubbing off on the things. They become sacred. So an altar does not have to be a big thing. It doesn't have to be a ginormous table with a white cloth on it and 3-foot tall pillar candles and gold plates and what have you. It does not. It could be simple. It could be a surface with one thing on it or a surface with nothing on it. Frequently, we place things on the altar that help us denote the purpose, that put us in, that create a psychological effect. And so I want to talk a little bit about psycho-spiritual effect of place and things and that sort of thing. And this is important, and it has been important to humankind forever. So when we find cave paintings that are 30,000 years old, they're created in a way that creates a psycho-spiritual effect. They're almost 3D. By torchlight, they appear to be moving. They create an effect on the mind, which then creates an effect on the spirit. I remember there have been several occasions where I have noted almost being overcome by the psycho-spiritual effect of place, by the environment. One was I was visiting Cologne, Germany, and the cathedral there is, breathtaking, unbelievable piece that's been, I don't want to misspeak, but I think it's like 700 years old or something like that. Huge stone edifice. And when you walk into that place, it's dark as a cave and just immense and echoey. And there's, flickering candlelight, and it has a palpable effect on you, even though I'm not a practicing Christian. I don't identify as Christian, but the place, the effect of the atmosphere on me is, could be felt. And undoubtedly, you've experienced this at some time in your life, and it happens, when we're out in nature and we observe a beautiful sunset, or we go to a special mountain, or we view an incredible canyon, or we walk into, we walk by a waterfall, or what have you. The sight, the sound, the atmosphere creates certain psychological conditions that are, can be felt, that has an effect on spirit. So your altar space can be like a mini version of that. Okay. And so when if and when you create an altar, or you look at an altar that you have, you want to look at it with that in mind, thinking, what is it doesn't even have to be sort of, really able to be put into words, but you want to think about what is the effect you want to create on yourself with this altar. So when I'm teaching, and I create the temporary altar, which is an altar cloth on the floor and lit candles and a vase of flowers, I want when people to come into my class to feel comfortable, to feel like it's a place of beauty, to feel welcome, to see the lights, to see the candlelight, and have that sort of the effect of, we think about light has effect of feeling hope and positivity and all of those things. So I want people to experience that. And so the altar the altar space I create is designed in a very specific, conscious way to create a certain effect on people when they come in. And to be a focus, it's in the center. When I teach, we set up in a circle, and it is in the center of the circle. So it becomes, becomes an area of focus in the class. When people aren't focused on what I'm teaching, some of their focus is drawn to this thing, and the collective energy of the class or the circle adds to the spirit of the altar, and then people put their sacred objects on them, and they become empowered by the group, and then when they bring them home, they carry that power with them. So you can do the same thing. You can create a space and think about intentionally what's the space that you want to create. I have an altar space that I use particularly for new moon ceremonies, and particularly with certain types of ritual and things. That is much darker. And again, this dark doesn't necessarily mean demonic or evil or bad. I think that is, that is just not a great way of looking at things. And I think it was one of my first podcasts. It might have been the very first episode where I talked about dark and light being two sides of the same coin, really. So, new moon, which is when, the moon is dark, right? It's, you see nothing of the moon other than you could potentially see the outline of the moon, but there's no crescent showing. It's the opposite of a full moon, is when the moon is going from its waning phase into its waxing phase. So it's a time of, a time of rebirth. It's a time of fertile manifestation, of change, of all of these things. And so if we don't just read the darkness of we're scared of things we don't see, and so we're going to project our demons into the darkness, then it takes on a much different thing. So I have, I have work that I do with a new moon. I know lots of people do full moon stuff, but I do that as well. But I also do work with a new moon. And I have an altar that is much darker because it is meant to represent the darkness of the moon and the transition from waning to waxing and the transition from decrease to increase. So it's a very good time to do things like wealth rituals or rituals around material sustenance, that sort of thing. So, it's meant to create a certain psychospiritual effect for me. And it's something, creating specific effects with looks and music and incense and all of those things is an area. And, this is going to sound like a brag, and it is. It's a little bit of a brag, and I apologize. But it's something that I'm fairly good at, at least for myself. I don't know if anybody else looking at my altars would feel the same way that I do. But I've gotten better at creating the effect that I want using visual stimulus, using different kinds of incense. So using all of the senses. So you can do the same. You can use all of your senses. You can, if it's safe to do so. You can burn incense on your altar. You pay attention to what scent of what the scent of incense is. What's the effect you're trying to create? You can reference all kinds of material out there that this incense is good for this and this incense is good for this. But I think, again, like with the visual inventory, you want to use your senses. If you don't like a particular kind of incense or you're allergic to it, I found out the hard way that I am allergic to burning mugwort, and some traditions burn mugwort as a way to smudge an area. and it causes my eyes to swell up and to turn bright red and look like I got punched in the eyes, and my nose to run and become completely congested. It's very uncomfortable. So I don't burn mugwort. I don't mind the smell, but the smoke is really bad for me. So you can choose things like incense or even essential oils or what have you. So you can use scent. I'm in the process of creating my own incense at this point, not to sell, but for my own purpose. Creating my own incense based on an ancient Egyptian recipe that I love all of the components of. So I think together will be really nice, and I'm going to play with blends and things. So you can create scent. You can create visuals. When you're using your altar, you can potentially think about what sound you want to use there. If you're meditating, depending on your tradition, maybe you might have some music or chanting playing, or you might chant or sing or what have you. And all of these things can create a psychospiritual effect. So if you think about religious ceremonies, Buddhist or Catholic or what have you, they're burning incense in censers. There's candlelight. If you're at a temple, there's images of the gods and goddesses, and there's people chanting, or there's people singing very, special songs and that sort of thing. And all of this creates this effect that helps us focus. It helps us feel closer to spirit. It helps us achieve particular spiritual goals, or align our energy with a particular spiritual reality or deity or what have you. So we can think about all of these things when we think about our altars or creating an altar. I think it's a good thing, even if you don't have a permanent space, or it's not convenient for you to create a permanent space. If you have a shelf or a drawer that you could use, even temporarily, once in a while, that's better than nothing. Or if you have a cloth that you can put down on the floor, and put a couple of sacred objects on, or representations of things. Whatever you can do, I think altars obviously are a good thing. I've got a little altar crazy, but I like them, and I think personal altars have such huge potential because you create them to be whatever you want them to be. If you want an altar to help with meditation, have a meditation altar and pay attention to how it makes you feel when you sit in front of that altar. When you look at the objects on the altar, when you look at the placement of the altar, where is it? Do you have candles burning? Do you have incense burning? Do you use essential oils for scent? Do you put fresh flowers on there? Do you make offerings? So offerings are another thing, and I'll speak really briefly about offerings, because that could be a whole other podcast. But I do have altars that I use for offerings, and the offerings that I make are usually relatively traditional for the for the spirits that I'm working with. So offerings are always made to spirit or to spirits, right? It's not just, I'm going to throw some stuff on the ground or, what have you. I'm going to throw some stuff out there, and whoever wants it can want it. Like your offerings, will be most effective if they are intentional. And there's lots of reasons to make offerings. For one thing, there is an exchange in spirit, right? One thing you might offer spirit is prayer. Like when you offer praise and prayer to deity or spirits, that is a type of offering. You are giving your attention and spiritual energy to that spirit. Okay, that is a form of offering. But usually when people are talking about offerings, they're talking about material things, and certain spirits like traditionally certain types of offerings. So I know very little about the practice of voodoo, but I do know that there are spirits in voodoo that are, appealed to or worked with, that traditional offerings are things like cigars and rum. And so if you offered flowers to that spirit, it might not work the way you wanted to work. When I make offerings to nature spirits, I normally offer things that the animals in the area will eventually, potentially come and eat as well. So I'll offer things like seeds. I might offer cornmeal. Some people will do offer tobacco to nature spirits, and that, that's fine too. Especially in the Americas, that's a traditional offering. Cornmeal and tobacco are really traditional offerings to spirits of place, and that's fine. I will offer tobacco to if I do a ceremonial fire, I will offer things to the spirit of the fire, and tobacco is one that I offer there pretty frequently. And I don't use like cigarettes and stuff. I use big tobacco leaves, because it actually smells really good when it's burning, as opposed to the way cigarettes smell to me, which is nasty. So I use forms of tobacco, but that's really traditional where I live. So spirits of place are really important, and traditions of offering are really important. So for example, there are places where spirits of nature, you would offer milk and honey, something I also do. I certain times make offerings, we'll say, to the goddess Hecate, which is a Greek goddess of sorcery and many other things. And so traditional offerings for her that I have done are frequently like eggs and honey and incense. And obviously you have to, like, if they're food offerings, you have to be careful about, hygiene, things like that. You don't want like rotting food. And there may be traditional ways of disposing of food especially if you have them on an indoor altar for any period of time, and you want to pay attention to that, methods of offering. So when you make offerings, there's usually a prayer that goes along with it that says, I'm dedicating these items to you. And yeah, they're physical items, but in shamanic belief, many other beliefs, everything that we see or experience has a spiritual component to it. So food has a physical aspect, or wine or honey or flowers or seeds or cornmeal or tobacco has physical representation, but it also has a spiritual aspect. And the idea is that we're exchanging the spiritual energy of the thing we're offering for something, something in return, whether that's favor or attention or, or what have you. Normally for me, it's like favor or attention. And sometimes in some traditions, not to be too mercenary, but we're offering something to really get something in return. Like, you have a sick child, or something paranormal is going on in my house. And by the way, making offering, like if you have paranormal stuff going on in your house, making offerings can sometimes be a really nice way of creating more harmony in your space, creating a harmonious relationship with the spirit rather than trying to cast it out. It's like, oh, you have guests over and they're being a little raucous, give them a meal and they'll calm down, kind of thing. So an altar can be a great space to make offerings. Again, I'll probably do a whole podcast on offerings, how to make offerings, what they are, how they relate to spirituality, but I just wanted to touch on that because I do have a couple of altars that I use for offerings, and one is outdoors. And I will very often place food on that altar that is good for the animals, the wildlife in the area. They'll come and eat it. And that's fine. I know that that's happening. That doesn't mean that the spirits of nature didn't receive that, because animals are part of the spirits of nature. Is that they took spiritual sustenance from those offerings, that they took the exchange of energy, that I don't expect to get it back. In some traditions, people will eat the items that they have sacrificed. I do know in places they will, sacrifice. I'm saying sacrifice. It is a sacrifice. When you give something up, it's a sacrifice. There's also the traditional word meaning like I've killed an animal. I do not practice that form of sacrifice, nor do I place judgment upon people who do that in a traditional way. It's not for me. It's definitely not for me. I don't like it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to judge you if that's part of your tradition. And in some traditions, they, let's say they kill a chicken, they sacrifice a chicken, they offer it up to the gods, but then they do actually eat the animal that's been sacrificed, which I think is probably a little bit better, because even though the material sustenance has been offered to spirits, or the spiritual sustenance has been offered to spirits, the animal might have been killed for dinner anyway. I don't know. I guess I'm not going to make moral or ethical judgments. I'll just say that I don't participate in any sort of animal or human sacrifice. I don't do that. It's not part of my tradition or makeup or anything like that. But there are traditions where that goes back hundreds, if not thousands of years, and I can't really speak to that without placing judgment that I probably don't have a right to place. So, with that, I have been talking for longer than an hour. I have my coffee here. It's probably a little chilly by now. Not too bad. It's still warm in my mug. But I would encourage you to consider keeping a personal altar as part of your spiritual practice, and consider the ways that you can do that. And gosh, we live in the internet age where you can go on to Pinterest or 100,000 other websites and see images of people's altars and take inspiration from them, if that is a thing you need to do. But I gave you some guidelines about, really consciously thinking about what you might place on your altar and paying attention to the psychological, emotional, and spiritual effect each item, plus the collection of items, if there's more than one thing on your altar. Really pay attention to that and the effect that it has on you, and you can then it becomes like a machine, like a technology that can be tuned. I like that. It's spiritual tech, right? It can be tuned like a radio, but what you're tuning is your feelings. You're tuning your psychology. You're tuning your spiritual effect. The altar is a tool. It is one of many tools. I'll discuss more in future podcasts, but this is a really powerful one, and one I was inspired to talk about today from some altar work that I had done. With that, I will wish you all the love in the world. You deserve more love, not less, and that doesn't matter who you are. I love you, and you deserve more love, not less. You are beautiful, whole, and complete, just as you are. I would ask you not forget that. And then we'll talk to you next time.
You have been listening to Speaking Spirit with your host, John Moore. For more info or to contact John, go to mainshaman.com. That's maineshaman.com.